The waitress slid an envelope across the table and did not meet Rachel's eyes. Inside, a photograph of Rachel and Lily and 2 words on the back, "Still here." Rachel's fingers closed around Lily's red scrap as if it were a lifeline. 2 bikers in the corner watched the room like vultures or saints. A single text from Mark had already set dangerous people into motion. In that thin, bright second, their ordinary morning split and could not be stitched back. What happened next shocked everyone and set off a chain of events no one saw coming. Stay with me, this is a story you need to hear. Before we start the story, comment below and let us know where in the world you're watching from today. And if you find this story impactful, don't forget to subscribe for more. The rain had been steady all morning, small nails of water tapping the window panes of the diner like a nervous hand. Steam rose from coffee cups and wrapped itself around the neon sign outside until the letters blurred into a soft, aching glow. The room smelled of frying onions and burnt sugar, the kind of smell that made people slow down and pretend they had time to waste. Plates clinked. A radio in the corner hummed an old song that made Rachel think of better days she could no longer name. Rachel held Lily's hand the way people hold a rope on a cliff. Lily was 6, thin as a pencil, with hair that refused to stay in the neat braid Rachel tried to make every morning. Her small jacket smelled like crayons and rain. She hummed under her breath a little tune she had made up and watched the other diners with a steady, curious gaze. Children know the world by the way it looks, folding it like paper airplanes until they decide which one to fly. Rachel's fingers were dry and raw from the night before. She scrubbed dishes at the diner until her knuckles had gone white. She had told herself 100 times that this job would be temporary. "Just until we are safe," she had whispered into the dark, and the dark had not answered. Her life was a thin pillow, one breath away from the floor. Still, she tied the knot of her courage and stepped inside. An older man at the counter glanced at them and then away. The waitress, who had the kind of tired smile that meant she had seen every kind of trouble there is, led them to a booth near the window. Outside, the rain made lines on the glass like secret writing. Rachel liked that. Things could look urgent and still mean nothing. Lily pulled a small paper from her pocket and placed it on the table like an offering. Rachel had not seen her tuck it there. It was a jagged scrap from a notebook, folded once. The edges were soft from being held. On one side, a child's drawing, a motorcycle with 2 round headlights, had been smeared by a thumbprint. Under it in careful letters, Rachel recognized Lily's attempt to write. It said, "For Mummy. I will tell you." The sight of it tightened something low in Rachel's chest. She smiled, small and quick, at Lily. "What will you tell me?" she asked. Her voice wanted to be ordinary. Her voice wanted to be the voice of someone whose worries could be put away in a drawer. Lily touched the drawing as if it were fragile glass. "When someone helps," she said, "I will show them." Her face was a little serious, and then it brightened. "Like the lady with the red scarf at church. She taught me a game." The narrator watching them might have called the game nothing more than a child's fancy. The city watched them with indifferent eyes, counting heartbeats by traffic lights. But the part of a voice that lived in Rachel's chest heard every small sound like a warning drum. There were reasons for the games Rachel did not explain. At night she woke to the echo of a man's voice that sounded too near. She had left one life for another. Names, papers, and doors had been exchanged in the quiet hours. She had told herself that faith and small work and steady routines would make a life that should not be broken again. She had promised Lily a quieter world, and then discovered that promises were as heavy as suitcases. The waitress returned with steaming plates. The coffee stewed the air into a dark, warm mist. Rachel tried to eat, but the food tasted like something she recognized only as fuel. She watched Lily tracing the rim of a cup with her finger, drawing invisible maps. The little girl had a habit of closing one eye when she thought hard. Rachel had taught her that to steady the aim of a slingshot once, years before a different war showed up in their lives. That memory came back like a sudden bruise. Across the way, a pair of men in leather jackets pushed the diner's glass door open. Rain spattered their collars and made their hair curl wet. They moved like people used to moving in another language. Bikers, if labels mattered. One was taller, with a jaw that looked carved. The other laughed low and easy, the kind of laugh that made a table full of men look at their meals, and then the door like they were waiting for a scene. They did not see Rachel and Lily at first. They sat a few booths down, quiet for a moment, scanning the room like two eyes taking in a picture. Rachel felt them in the air, as one feels the turn of a season. She did not know these men. She had no reason to be careful around them other than a small animal sense that certain kinds of strangers carried stories in their pockets. Lily watched them too, curious, and then returned to her drawing, folding the edge of the paper as if hiding something precious. The voice that is kind stays quiet here. It waits and watches. The other voice, sharper and more honest, tells things as if they are small hard stones. Rachel was not safe. That sentence is not a dramatic truth. It is an observation as simple and resolute as the rain outside. She had traces around her life that could be followed. An unpaid bill here, an old address there, wrong names on the wrong phone. The world had a way of remembering you when you wanted to be forgotten. A child at the next booth dropped a fork. The metal sang. A woman laughed and told a story about her cat. The laughter felt like a thin, bright thing that could cut through the heaviness. Rachel let herself listen, and for a breath, be ordinary. Then Lily reached into her pocket again, and this time took out a small fold of cloth, a scrap of red, tied with a loose stitch. She unfolded it and looked at it like a prayer. Rachel had given it to her months ago, sewn from an old scarf that smelled faintly of lavender and of simpler years. If you ever feel afraid, Rachel had said once, mostly to hear herself say something that made sense, hold this and look at me. Lily held the scrap and touched her little ear with her fingertips, the soft pad of skin behind the lobe. She pressed her hand to her mouth as though testing a sound. Rachel watched and felt that same drumbeat start again. She swallowed. Her throat was dry. What the observers would not know yet is that small acts turn into paths. A child's touch can become a signal. A folded cloth can be a map. People who watch for danger learn to make secret signs. It makes the world smaller but safer. It also makes it full of codes that look like ordinary life to everyone else. Rachel reached across the table and smoothed a curl from Lily's forehead. Her hand lingered, and she thought of a name she had not said aloud for months. Mark. She had promised herself she would never say his name in public. Saying it aloud gave it shape. The thought of him was like a cold stone in her stomach. He had been the reason they moved, the reason they moved again, and the reason Rachel had learned the slow steps of leaving. There was a map in her memory of narrow stairwells and long roads. There was a map Lily did not know, and there was a map she could not take back. Outside, the rain kept going. The neon sign buzzed like a sleepy insect. The two bikers finished their coffee and left a bill folded in old leather on the table. They walked out in the same way they had come in, quiet, weathered, not yet part of the story at all. Inside, Rachel folded her napkin and tucked it into her pocket. She looked at Lily and tried to compartmentalize the fear so it would fit into a small, ordinary jar. She breathed in the warm, fried air, and she let a tiny, brave smile come to her face. For Lily's sake, she had to be brave. But bravery is not something you can keep in one hand. It moves around like a coin. Sometimes you lose it when you need it most. Someone in the room began a soft prayer. A string of words said without rhythm. The narrator who watches from a distance took note. Here, on the edge of an ordinary morning, two lives stood like thin reeds in a steady wind. The wind would bend them. It might break one. The story had begun, and the world around them hummed on, unaware or unwilling to notice. The bell over the diner's door chimed again, a thin, ordinary sound that meant nothing and everything at once. Outside, the rain had thinned to a gray mist that painted the world in soft edges. Conversation folded and refolded around the room. Someone telling a joke, someone else answering a call, a child asking why the sky was tired. For a moment, Rachel let herself float on those currents, the way a boat lets the tide decide its first breath. Lily did not ask for much. She drew small loops on the paper tablecloth, her tongue caught in the corner of her mouth, concentrating the way a person concentrates when they are keeping a secret. She had the scrap of red tucked now under her ear, pressed where Rachel had taught her to press if she ever needed to be seen and not heard. It was an old, soft thing, more memory than cloth, but to them it was a compass. The two bikers sat across the room, shadows against the neon. They had their jackets off now, putting on the slow, careful manners of people who had been on the road too long to be sudden. The taller one, Tom, the narrator who knew faces a long time later might name him, watched the way Lily held the scrap. He had seen signals before. Roads taught a man to look for small things. His friend, Daniel, stirred his coffee and did not look away. Both of them were eating silence like spare bread. The cold voice in the story's margins, honest and blunt, would simply state, a child making a sign in a public place catches the eye of two men who read the world like maps. The warm voice, the one that lived inside Rachel's chest, would press itself to the surface and say, what if the look they give is mercy? Rachel felt the look, the way a cat feels a footstep on a stair. It was not exactly a look. It was the tilt of a head, a small narrowing at the eyes that said we saw something. She told herself she was being foolish. She told herself stories to put the fear back into a drawer. She had learned to speak in small lies to keep Lily whole. Brave today, brave tomorrow. Then the man at the counter, the one with the neat hat and the hands that had a habit of rubbing together, took a phone call that pulled the room's temperature down by a few degrees. He listened, his mouth a thin line. The story's impartial voice would record facts. The man said 3 words into the phone, she is here. He did not raise his voice. His hand, when he left, dropped a light brown envelope on the counter. It slid slightly before stopping. The waitress wiped her hands and picked it up with the casual grace of someone who touches danger often without wanting to look. Rachel did not notice the man's words at first. She was busy folding napkins into small, neat squares in her mind, pretending to plan for tomorrow. Enough money for milk, another day working late, perhaps a quiet bus ride past someone who would not look twice. Lily hummed. The world kept its rhythm. Then the waitress moved toward their booth and, with a face like a map someone had drawn and then erased, set the envelope down with one hand and smiled a tired smile. For you, she said. Her voice was syrup and stone. Rachel did not take the envelope right away. Her fingers hovered, and for one small breath she thought to make a joke, to turn danger into coffee. The warm narrator would have wanted to soften that moment, make it ordinary again, but the sharper voice refused. Some things must be noticed before they have done their work. Rachel slid a finger under the flap. The paper inside was thicker than ordinary. Her breath stuttered. There was a photograph folded within, an old, glossy print that smelled faintly of smoke and something else she could not name. She opened it with the tremor of someone untying a knot she had tied herself. The photo showed Rachel and Lily at the park last summer. Rachel, with her hair tucked behind one ear, looking at Lily as if the child were a miracle. Lily mid-laugh, a sunbeam in her small face. On the back of the photo, in a neat hand that made Rachel's throat dry, were 2 words, still here. The world narrowed to a pinprick. For a second, everything else in the diner moved as if underwater. Rachel could hear the radio as if through cotton. Her fingers left a wet print on the photograph. She did not know who had taken that picture. She did not know how it had been folded and tracked to this booth. The neat handwriting implied calculation. The phrase implied vigilance. Outside, 2 cars went past, bright lights cutting the mist into hard coins. The tall man who had said the words into his phone now stood by the door, hands in the pockets of his coat, looking outward. He did not look at Rachel. He did not need to. He had already put a thread through her life. Rachel held the photograph against her ribs like a small animal. She felt something in her chest like an animal pressing back. She wanted to stand up and walk out the door with Lily, to disappear into alleys where maps forget them. But the waitress's eyes were odd, soft with sympathy, but edged with something like calculation. When Rachel looked, she thought she saw the waitress's hand brush, very briefly, the back of the counter as a man passed. The movement was too quick to be accidental. The sharper voice whispers a suggestion. Sometimes the people you trust by default, the ones who offer coffee and a smile, are the ones who can most easily fold you into a plan. The compassionate voice says, maybe the woman was only kind. Both can be true at once. Life keeps both voices, and for a while, Rachel had to keep both. She leaned down and whispered to Lily, forcing the smallest of smiles. "We'll go," she said, voice small. Her fingers closed around the photograph, as if it were a ticket to somewhere she did not want to go. Lily looked up at her with the unquestioning faith of children. "Okay," she said. Her voice was a bell. Before they left, Lily touched the red scrap under her ear, a tiny, practiced motion that made the cloth press to skin. She did not look at Tom or Daniel. She did not need to. The gesture was for more than the two men. It was for every pair of eyes that had ever watched a small signal and made the choice to follow. The bikers were already watching. Tom's jaw had tightened when the waitress set the envelope down. Daniel's fingers had paused over a biscuit. They did not move to interfere in the moment. They did not need to. They had seen the scrap, had seen the way Lily had tucked it. The road teaches certain languages. A hand to the ear meant attention. A folded cloth could ask for help without crying aloud. Tom felt something shift inside him. Old roads, old promises, the memory of a girl once left at a shop years back. And he stood. Rachel slid the photograph back into the envelope with motions that were careful and small. She left bills on the table, like a person leaving a trail of crumbs, and stood, tucking Lily's coat around her like a shell. Her face was smooth. She tried to make sure the fear did not show. She had taught herself that people did not need to clutch panic like a child holds a toy. They could hide it in their pockets and say everything was fine. As they headed for the door, Rachel glanced over her shoulder, not knowing what she looked for. She saw the man at the counter lift his head and look directly at her for the first time since the phone call. His eyes were calm. They contained no fire. Only the patient, inevitable glaze of someone who waits out storms. Outside, the rain had reduced to a polite sprinkle. The neon sign buzzed. The two bikers swung their legs off the bench and rose with the easy motion of people who had decided to move. Tom felt a small, determined thing inside his chest. If a girl made that signal in a public place, she was asking someone to follow. Some roads were about rescuing. Some roads carried guilt. He took his keys from the table and did not look back. The impartial voice would say, a decision was made. The warm voice says, mercy is not a feeling, it is an action. In the space of a moment, the ordinary morning had cracked. The note in Rachel's pocket hummed coldly, a message with teeth. The bikers rolled their machines into the mist. The story, small, fragile, and very human, had stepped onto the road. Rachel walked a little faster than she meant to, holding Lily's hand like it was a promise. The street smelled of wet asphalt and fried food from a stall someone had set up under a flickering lamp. She kept her head down and counted steps inside her own mind to stop thoughts from running wild. Each step was a sentence she had not yet decided to say out loud. Lily skipped beside her, humming the same tune she hummed in the diner. "Mummy," she said once, soft, like she was opening a small door. "Do bikers know secret games?" Rachel forced a laugh that sounded thin in the rain. "Sometimes," she said. "Sometimes they know more than they look like." Her words were careful. She did not want Lily to think about danger more than she had to. But Rachel felt something in her chest like an old bruise. A feeling that the photograph had pressed into her ribs was not gone. Someone had watched them. Someone had made the effort to say it out loud. Still here. Tom and Daniel followed at a distance that felt right. The road taught them how to keep a space that was not too close and not too far. Tom rode like someone who had refused easy answers his whole life. He had a scar along his eyebrow that made him look like he was always thinking a step ahead. Daniel rode with his shoulders relaxed, a man who let jokes fall out of him to fill quiet places. On the bike, they moved together like a single animal. "Did you see the kid with the cloth?" Daniel asked, half to break a silence, half to understand what his friend was thinking. Tom did not answer for a long moment. He could remember an alley years ago where a girl had been left alone and someone had chosen not to follow through. The memory tasted like iron and regret. "I saw," he said finally. "She looked like she wanted someone to notice." The words were small, but they carried something heavy. Daniel kicked his heel against the bike's peg. "That could be nothing," he said. "Could be a game, could be a toy." He wanted to make the world softer, to put a cushion under every sudden snap of fear. The voice inside him that liked order sputtered at any hint of threat. Tom thought of a girl left behind in the rain, and how the memory had kept returning like a dry cough. "Or not," he said. "If it's not, we'll be wrong. If it is, we'll be late." His jaw clenched. The decision slid into place without ceremony. Sometimes mercy did not ask permission. Back at the diner, Susan wiped down the counter with precise strokes. Her hands moved in a rhythm she had kept since she was a teenager. Push the cloth, fold it, repeat. She had a way of smiling that made people think she had nothing to hide. But when she had put the envelope on Rachel's table, her hand had trembled for a second. The tremble had come from a message that had buzzed on her phone earlier. One she read and then erased as if she could unknow the words. A man named Peter had texted, "She's at the Hillcrest." Peter's messages were short, like his sentences. Susan had known Peter for years. He came into the diner sometimes, left a small pile of coins, and always ordered black coffee. People like Peter liked to watch things happen and not get their hands wet. Susan had put the envelope down because something made her feel like she was doing the right thing. Maybe she was trying to make up for a past she had not forgiven herself for. The past was a small, stubborn animal that often sat on people's shoulders and whispered directions. When Rachel left the diner, she had not seen Susan slip into the kitchen and make a quiet call with a voice that tried not to sound like it belonged to someone who had just done something small and terrible. "Done," she whispered into the receiver. She took it. She left. The voice on the other end answered with a short noise that sounded like a breath. Susan put the phone down slowly and stared at the back door as if expecting a ghost. Inside Rachel, the narrator who loved her wanted to say everything. Tell Lily the truth, run far, make a life where photos could not find them. The impartial voice said what it always said in such moments. Facts will not save you. Only actions do. Rachel took a bus in the wrong direction on purpose for once, choosing a route with many turns. Her fingers worried about the seam of her coat. She had not trusted anyone for a long time. Trust was something she kept in a small box she rarely opened. Tom and Daniel pulled their bikes into a shadowed lot near a service station and watched as Rachel and Lily walked under the lamps. Daniel's eyes softened when he saw the child. "She looks like my niece," he said quietly. He had nieces he loved like small maps, places he could go and know exactly where to step. Daniel's own history was not clean. He had been in trouble once for the wrong reasons and had spent nights thinking about roads he could not take back. Those nights made him tender in dangerous places. Tom watched Rachel's face and thought of his own sister, Anna, who had left town with nothing but a backpack and never called again. He had held anger for years because he had not stopped her. That anger was now the cold coal that warmed his decisions. He wanted to fix things not because he expected a reward, but because he could not live with another small hand slipping away and being unable to catch it. Rachel felt the eyes on her back the way someone feels wind before a storm. She did not turn. She had practiced not turning since she had learned that looking back could name the thing that hunted you and make it hungry. Lily's small hand slid into hers and squeezed. "Mummy," she said, "are we safe now?" The question hung between them like a thin glass. Rachel wanted to say yes because she had promised a life of small, safe things. Instead, she said truthfully, "We will try." The words were honest enough for now. Later that night, Tom sat in a small room above a garage, oil under his nails, and a mug of coffee cooled to lukewarm. He thought of the photograph and the narrow handwriting on the back. A twist of feeling, something close to recognition, ran along his spine. He could not place the hand, but he could place the intention. People who watched used neat hands. They wanted to be recognized. He tapped at the photograph's edge in his mind like a man testing a lock. Daniel came in with 2 donuts and sat on a metal chair. He watched Tom stir nothing into his coffee. "Are you sure about this?" he asked. He knew Tom's chest better than most men knew their own stirring. Daniel could read the little ways hesitation stacked on top of determination. Tom looked at him. "I'm sure," he said. "Something about that kid. I don't want to be the man who looks away." Daniel said nothing for a long moment. The man who wanted to make the world softer had to be ready to get his hands dirty sometimes. He nodded once and pushed a donut toward Tom. "Then we go," he said. "But if it's a setup, you're buying the first beer." He tried to make a joke because it steadied him. The room smelled of oil and old leather. Outside, rain washed the road clean again. In the small, private places where people kept their decisions, new threads had been sewn. Old debts, old guilt, and a child's folded scrap of cloth moved a new pattern into being. The central net, Rachel's fear, Tom's guilt, Daniel's kindness, Susan's small betrayal, Peter's patient hand, began to tighten, and none of them could say yet where it would end. The air smelled of wet leather and cold metal as Tom eased his bike into the shadow of an alley and watched Rachel and Lily slow at the corner. Rain still beads on the lampposts, making city lights look like little moons. Daniel killed his engine, and the 2 of them listened to the world in the small hush that comes when people are close to doing something that matters. They did not follow too close. That was how they rode, close enough to help, far enough not to make a scene. Tom kept his eyes on Rachel's back. He watched the way she tucked Lily's hair behind one ear, like a careful habit stitched into muscle. He watched the small, practiced way Lily touched the red scrap at her ear, and then made a quick, small sign with her fingers, a sign Tom knew from a life of stops and rescues. He felt the old, raw tug of memory. The city had a way of giving you chances to be brave again. Rachel and Lily turned down a narrow lane between a row of shuttered shops toward a small, hidden courtyard that smelled of damp bricks and old roses. The courtyard had one bench and a stair that led to a service door. Rachel moved like someone who had walked this route before, but had not wanted anyone to see her do it. She pulled a key from the inside pocket of her coat, the metal cold and familiar. Tom's eyes flicked at the gesture, noting the shape of the key as if it might be a code. Daniel nudged Tom. "She's not going home," he said softly. Tom's mouth formed a line. He eased forward by a few yards and killed his headlight, so only the faint outline of his bike showed. From the shadow he could see Susan, the waitress, leaning near the kitchen window of the diner, her hands tucked into the pockets of her apron. She watched Rachel as the woman passed, and for a moment Tom thought she might call out. She did not. Instead, she turned away and pulled her phone out as if to check messages. The light from the screen washed over her face. Tom saw the exact instant her thumb left the screen, small, decisive. She dropped the phone back and walked inside. Tom didn't know Susan well. He had noticed her before, a practical woman whose kindness hid a precise backbone. He had not thought of her as someone who would be part of any story not written in coffee stains. But people contained small, private histories that made them do unexpected things. Tom felt the unease settle like grit in his mouth. Rachel found the door she wanted. She used the key, and the lock side opened like the catcher of a secret. Lily peered in as if a treasure might be hidden beyond the frame. Rachel held the photo inside her hand, folded between her fingers, and then she let it go long enough to press the key. Inside, lights smelled like old wood and old stories. When she pushed the door, a man stepped out of the dimness, like a piece of the past came back to breathe. Peter, not the gentle cafe man Tom had imagined, but the same thin figure whose voice had been steady when Tom had once seen him in another town handing out coffee to men who needed to be watched. Peter's collar was up against the drizzle. He looked older than the picture Tom had in his mind. There was calm in his face that did not reach his eyes. "Rachel," Peter said. His voice was soft and had the practiced patience of someone who measured each word before letting it fall. Lily clutched Rachel's hand tighter, sensing the change. "You shouldn't have come here." Rachel's hand tightened on the key. Her jaw worked. "You sent the photo," she said. The statement slid out of her like a stone. She did not ask for an explanation. She demanded it in small, flat pieces. Peter looked at the photograph in her fingers as if seeing it again for the first time. "It found you," he said. He did not lie, but his tone was even. The word folded around them like a thin wire. "We were told you would be here." Rachel's face went still, the way water does before someone throws a pebble. "Who told you?" she asked. Peter's mouth made a line, and then he pointed, with a small, precise motion, toward the diner's back window where Susan had disappeared. "Some people keep well-placed friends," he said. "We don't want trouble, Rachel. We just want what's ours." Tom felt a cold thread run through his ribs. His hand went, without him thinking, to the small knife at his belt. Daniel's shoulders tightened behind him. All the stories they had been told as boys about tricks and debts spooled through Tom's head like film. He had a bad feeling that dishes had already been washed and put away. Things were quietly prepared for the moment they planned to take. Rachel's voice was quieter now, but with an edge that surprised Tom. "You can't," she started. Peter's face shifted. The softness left like fog burned by the sun. "You took something," he said. "You can't hide forever. Mark says it was careless. He says children should not have to be part of this." Hearing Mark's name was a slamming in Tom's chest. The word made a small drumbeat of memory. Mark. The man Rachel had once whispered into the dark. The man Tom had seen in the eyes at a funeral years ago. The hard, respectable kind of man that hides knives under suits. The name was a linchpin, sudden and heavy. Tom felt the world tilt. Rachel's fingers tightened on the photograph until it creased. "I didn't take anything that belongs to a child," she said. Her voice was uneven, like a wire being strained. "I left. I did what I could." Peter's jaw clicked. "People don't just walk away with that kind of thing, Rachel. Not without consequence." He studied Lily for a long moment, tracing the innocence in the little girl's face, as if he could find a reason to be soft. Then he turned away. "I'm sorry for the alarm, but you will come with us, or you will give us what you took. We are not cruel people, Rachel. We have been patient." At the word patient, Tom felt heat roll through him. He moved then, before the quiet could settle into a choice. He stepped from the shadow and put himself in the line between Peter and the two women. He did not mean to be dramatic. He only wanted to see the truth in their faces, whether they were a threat or a plea. Peter turned slowly. His eyes flicked to Tom, and for a brief fraction of a breath Tom saw recognition. No surprise, but a memory that had stored itself and waited. "You," Peter said. "You were at the old docks that night." Tom felt something like waking from sleep. He did not know if Peter's voice named him as an enemy or as a man whose past entanglements had arrived to weigh him down. "You know me?" Tom said, quiet. Peter nodded. "I know many faces, Tom." The world is small for those of us who watch. Tom's first reaction was a bright flare of anger. Someone who had spent years thinking he could live clean had now his life tangled with other people's old debts. But then he saw Rachel's face and the small, weary way she stood. He saw Lily like a candle flame that could be snuffed by a careless hand. His anger changed its direction, like a river folding to save a village. "Let them go," Tom said simply. Peter's laugh was the sound of a switch being turned. "If I say yes, I'm dead," he said. "If I say no, I'm dead. We are all choices and consequences, Tom." He looked at Rachel again, the angle of his jaw hard as stone. "You took ledgers. You took names. You thought you could bury them with a new life. Men like Mark don't forget accounts." Rachel's face went blank as paper. Tom watched the small lines form at the corners of her eyes. Years pressed in, and then she reached into the inside of her coat and drew out a small object wrapped in oilcloth. She held it as if it might explode. "For Lily," she said. The object was not a child's toy. It was small, flattened, and heavy with history. Tom could not know in that glance exactly what it was. Papers? A memory, but he felt its weight like guilt. "If you hand that over," Peter said, eyeing the object, "you might be safe." Rachel's hand shook. "It's not just for me," she said. "It belongs to people who trusted me. I took it to stop the pain." Peter's tones hardened. "You wanted protection. You used a child to hide. That's cruel, Rachel." Susan's face had appeared now at the kitchen doorway, her mouth thin. Tom could see fresh shame there, or perhaps fear. She had not expected him to move from the shadows. Up close, the betrayal in her eyes was a complicated thing. Fear pressed into choice. Tom felt a new, colder understanding slip into him. The betrayal had not been a simple act of malice. It had been a selection under pressure. Susan had made a choice he could not yet forgive, but he could understand the terror that made clever people fold. Rachel's breath hitched. Lily's hand trembled in hers. Tom felt his own hands go steady like ropes thrown to a drowning man. "No one takes you," he said, looking at Peter as if the world was balanced for the next few seconds. "We'll get you somewhere safe." Peter smiled then, and it was a smile that did not reach his eyes. "You might take them," he said. "You might try. But Mark has patience in pockets. There are other people who will notice a missing ledger. There are other men who keep records." He folded his hands and looked down at Lily as if the child were an honest ledger entry. "You made enemies, Rachel. That's the truth." The alley swallowed the quiet. Tom's heart hammered in a measured rhythm. Betrayal had a face now in Susan's turned shoulders and in Peter's calm. It had a price. And in the center of it all, Rachel held the thing she had taken, an action meant to stop harm that may now only draw attention closer. Tom wanted to rage against every system that made people choose between safety and truth. He wanted to rinse the world clean of men like Mark and Peter. But the world did not yield to wishes. It yielded to plans and to the sharp edges of decisions. Tom looked at Rachel, at Lily, at Susan, and felt the first surrender of certainty. Helping them would be more complicated than following a child's scrap of red. The road ahead was not only about mercy now. It was about consequences and the ugly cost of doing what you thought was right. The alley smelled of wet stone and the faint, sour tang of engine oil. Tom could feel the city tightening around them, like a fist closing slow and patient. He moved with decisions already made, but every step carried memory and choice tangled together. Daniel fidgeted with the strap of his jacket, the movement a small sign of how close they were to losing the calm they had carried until that moment. Rachel held Lily's hand like a promise with frayed edges. The little girl's eyes were wide, but she kept breathing in and out like a child taught to count to 10. The object Rachel had offered to Peter, whatever weight it carried, still pulsed in her mind. She had given it up because she thought it might buy them time. Now that it had been seen, nothing felt simple. Peter had retreated into the rain and the shadow of the street, leaving his words to settle like a stain. "Mark has patience in pockets," he had said. The phrase bounced around Rachel's skull with a new, cruel rhythm. Men with pockets could buy silence, bribe officials, erase papers. Men with patience could wait until fear crumbled the most careful plans. Where now? Daniel asked, voice low. Tom's jaw worked. He scanned the alley's exits the way a man reads a map, plans folding and unfolding in his head. We go to a place I know, he said. There's an old barn past the river. My friend Mika runs it. It's off the grid. We can think there. Rachel hesitated because every movement had consequences. If Mark can find me, if he has people watching the diner, he can find a barn. The words were a small hot stone she could not spit out. She had learned the world had rooms that closed too quickly. Tom looked at her and did not look away. We have to move, he said. Standing still is a choice too. There was a bluntness to him that kept simple things from drifting into false hope. Daniel stepped forward and offered to take the back streets. He would lead. I'll take the small roads. Keep to the shadows, he said. He wanted to sound confident and almost managed it. As they moved, Rachel's phone buzzed in her pocket, silent but urgent. She had kept it turned down for months, a small effort to pretend the world could not reach her by light. She fished it out with fingers that trembled. The screen showed a name she had blocked a long time ago, one that rang against the inside of her head like a bell. Mark. Her breath shortened. She considered answering and did not. The decision felt like stepping into cold water. If she did speak, she would be heard. If she did not, Mark might think she was hiding. The pause stretched, and in it 1,000 small fears crowded her. She slid the phone back into her pocket without letting it ring. Silence was temporary. So was safety. They moved through quiet streets where shop shutters used to tell time. A stray dog followed them for a while and then dropped away. The bikers kept the bikes a block off, abandoning the ease of engines for the stealth of feet. Tom could feel eyes in the shadows like pins. He had the odd, precise dread that came when you know someone has already walked the path your feet are taking. At an intersection lit by a single flickering lamp, a sedan idled, its driver watching. Tom angled himself so he could see the car, and for a moment, its windows felt like black mirrors. The driver smoked a cigarette, the ember a small red star. Daniel's breath hitched. We're being watched, he said. Rachel's fingers went to Lily's hair without thinking. She whispered, keep your head low. The words felt small and not nearly enough. They ducked into a narrower lane and cut through a courtyard where laundry hung like flags. Tom felt the car turn the corner a block behind them, and then slow. The driver's patience matched Peter's words. If Mark had patience, he would wait until they were tired. They reached the outskirts where warehouses gave way to a thin ribbon of trees. Tom led them through an old service gate and down a waterlogged path. It smelled of moss and something older. The city's bright hum grew distant. The world narrowed to the steady steps of 3 adults and the small, soft thrum of a child's feet. At Mika's barn, they found the door open and 2 figures silhouetted against a single lamp. Mika herself, small and fierce in a cap, moved like someone who had patched many broken things. Her hands were clean and smelled faintly of oil and herbs. She pulled them into a narrow room with a map tacked to a wall and a pot of tea steaming on a rough table. Sit, Mika said. Her voice was practical. Tell me everything. Her eyes flicked to Lily, then to Rachel. They were not soft, they were careful. Mika had a way of seeing how people broke. Rachel sat, and the room's warmth seemed to press against her cold. For the first time since the photos slipped into their lives, she tried to explain what she had done, why she had taken whatever she had, what she wanted to fix, and why she had thought running would keep Lily safe. Words rattled out like pebbles down a hill. Tom and Daniel listened, occasionally asking small, exact questions that mapped practical paths. Who knew what? Where the ledgers might be, whether anyone else had been compromised. You put a target on your back, Mika said, not unkindly. And you did it because you wanted to stop harm. That doesn't make you a fool. Her words were rough-sanded comfort. Rachel's throat burned with unshed tears. She had not thought of herself as a martyr. She had thought of herself as a woman with a duty. "How many people know?" Tom asked. "Only me and Lily," Rachel said, and then forced her memory through the sieve of honesty. "And Susan, and I think Peter must have known. I thought Susan was just helping. I thought she was tired, not a traitor. Her eyes were raw. I thought a small town would protect us." The room sighed with a quiet that was nearly human. Tom felt his own guilt press against him again. He had told himself he was helping because he had to make up for things he had not done years ago. He had also felt the hope that someone might see a small child and mend their own past. The plan had been a precarious weaving of good intentions and mistakes. Mika spread a map and placed a coffee mug beside it like an anchor. "Mark's men won't be the only problem," she said. "If those ledgers touch certain desks, people in suits will start to act. You can't rely on the police. They will be slow, and some pockets keep deep money. You need to lay low, get the documents away from reach, and decide who you can trust." Rachel felt the weight of that last phrase hit her like a hand. Trust had been a small coin she had spent once and found empty. Now she had to decide who would carry the rest of her life secrets, and whether anyone could be trusted enough to not fold under the weight. That night, the barn's windows fogged with breath and worry. Lily slept between two coats, her small face turned toward the door. Rachel watched her like a tide watches a shore. Tom and Daniel took turns keeping watch, two men who had decided that last night's choice had become their business. Mika sat with a small lamp and a stack of old books, reading names as if they were maps to the future. As the hour deepened, Rachel felt the edges of her world fray. Every choice carries consequences now. To go to the police might be to invite an investigation that chewed through lives. To hide forever might be to hand the ledgers to an enemy who would never tire. The thought of surrendering Lily to any authority, legal or criminal, felt like a blade. Her mind spiraled through options and landed on none. Tom watched her, and then the two of them shared a look, one built of exhaustion and something that felt like a vow. "We'll find a way," he said, but even his voice trembled. Mercy had become a plan, and plans were fragile in a world that rewarded patience and pockets. Outside, the city continued, indifferent and loud. Inside the barn, choices leaned into one another like dominoes waiting for a push. The next moves would be small, a call to an old contact, a trip for forged papers, a plan to move the ledgers. But somewhere in the dark, men with patient pockets were counting time. The net was closing, and each heartbeat felt like a match struck at a tinderbox. The warehouse sat like a wound at the edge of the river, its corrugated skin rusted and yawning. Rain had stopped, but the ground still steamed, and the air smelled of iron and old wood. Lamps thrown from passing trucks turned puddles into mirrors. Inside, the rafters held shadows like secret tenants. The barn where they'd slept felt a world away. This place was deliberate, built to make people small. Tom kept to the dark, feeling the boards under his boots like a pulse. His hand stayed open and ready. Daniel's breath came in low, even beats. He kept pulling his jacket tighter, as if a shield could be made from cloth. Rachel moved like someone holding a cracked jewel, careful, protective, fierce. Lily clung to her coat hem, small and blinking, eyes reflecting light like polished glass. They had arranged the meeting to trade the papers for safe passage, an exchange, a negotiation built on someone's promise. Mark's men had asked for a neutral ground. Neutral had a taste here like old cigarettes. Tom did not trust neutrality. He trusted the weight of people beside him. Footsteps came first, measured a drum of several boots. Then a voice, smooth as oil, that made the air colder. "Rachel." Mark stepped out under a single lamp like a man who always entered rooms to take up the middle. He was older than the whiskey and newspaper stories painted him. A suit, a face that had been softened by time, but not by mercy. He smiled without pleasure. Rachel's lips were thin. Mark, she said. The name hung like a bell. Lily squeezed behind her skirts, a small trembling thing. You brought company, Mark said, and his glance slid over Tom and Daniel with an appraisal that pleased and unsettled. I was told you were alone. From the shadow near the doorway, Peter emerged, his hands empty, his face expressionless. He had been the courier. Now he played the role of the man who would watch consequences happen. Tom read him like a card, faceless, reliable, bought. Give it up, Peter said calmly. No one has to get hurt. Rachel stepped forward, and the thing wrapped in oilcloth was heavy in her hands, as if it knew its power. It doesn't belong to you, she said. It belongs to people who trusted me. Mark laughed softly. You think trust matters in my line? His tone was not cruel, exactly. I was tired and used to it. You took what was mine to control. That's theft. That's personal. As if on cue, a figure detached from the far shadow, Mika. She walked with the same small, fierce stride she used in the barn. For a second Tom thought she would stand with them. Instead she paused a few feet from Mark, and the light struck her face so he could see lines of worry carved there. Mika. Daniel's voice was a small question. He had not expected a betrayal, not this close. Mika's eyes flicked to Rachel, then to Mark. She swallowed. The air tightened as if someone had pulled the room together. I'm sorry, she said, and those two small words were thin cords stretched between cliffs. She turned and walked toward Mark, closing the short distance with steps that felt like surrender. The world shifted. A sting like hot salt spread across Tom's chest. Mika's hand brushed something metal by her belt, too quick for comfort. She mouthed something to Mark that Tom could not hear. Mark smiled then, wider, like someone who had taken a gamble and won. You did well, he said to Mika, as if she had earned praise for a job. Then, like a blade uncoiling, he added, you'll be safe now. Betrayal has a smell, the coppery taste of surprise and the bitter aftertaste of trust broken. Tom's throat tightened. Mika had not only betrayed them, she had staged the trap. The barn had been a lure. Susan's earlier glance at the counter, the switched messages, layers of betrayal had been stitched together, and now they lay like a net. Rachel's face went white as the oilcloth in her hands. Lily began to cry, small and sudden, the sound cutting. Tom moved before he thought, stepping forward as if his feet had decided for him. Mika, what are you doing? He demanded. Mika's eyes shone hard. She looked at Tom as if she carried a weight that was breaking her bones. I didn't have a choice, she said. Her voice cracked. They took Anna. For a second it was only the name, Anna. Tom remembered Anna, the sister he'd failed years ago. He didn't know who Anna was to Mika, but the word carried a hostage's chill. Mika's hands trembled. They have her, she breathed. They said if I didn't help, they would. Daniel's fist curled. Who has her? He barked. Mark's mouth turned up at the corner. We have ways to persuade people, he said. You help us, or someone you love gets hurt. It's poetic almost. His voice was casual, bloodless. You made the choice, Mika. You made the bargain. The ledger in Rachel's hands suddenly synced to a different rhythm. More than paper, it was proof of every quiet crime, of bribes paid, of names recorded. It could topple men. It could free people or burn them. Mark moved like a man tasting consequence. He felt the ledger's heat and wanted it inside his chest where he could close it from the world. Tom's anger was a tight wire. He stepped forward, blocking Mark's reach. We won't let you take her, he said, each word blunt as a nail. Mark's face shifted, and for the first time Tom saw something else, an old, private ache. You always do this, Mark said softly to Rachel. You run and take, thinking you'll fix things. He cocked his head and looked at Lily with something like a flicker of recognition. Rachel, he said, and the small syllable landed like an accusation and an admission. You couldn't walk away. Rachel's breath stuttered. Don't, she began, but her voice failed. Her eyes had grown wet with a history she had kept shut inside. Tom's mind spun. He waited for Mark to reach the moment's truth out, and Mark did not disappoint. "She is mine," he said quietly. "She has always been mine." The words hit like a fist. The air in the warehouse folded. Lily stopped crying and stared at Mark with the slow dawning confusion of a child who had been given a map with a hole in it. "You're lying," Rachel said, but the sound had the hollow of someone making a last, useless defense. "You left me," Mark said, and his voice was not mean so much as empty. "You left with her, Rachel. You left us, and we kept what we made. That child is my blood." He said it with the weary certainty of a man who has believed his own truths so long they became gospel. For a pulse, the world held its breath. Betrayal sat in Mika's shoulders and Susan's eyes. Secrets existed in the ledger and in the lines of Mark's face. Tom felt the fragile scaffolding of their plan begin to sag. Then Mika moved like someone burning a bridge behind themselves. She stepped forward between Mark and the child and put both hands on him. Not gentle, not trusting, just real. "You promised you'd leave her alone," she hissed. "You promised Anna would be safe." Mark's smile was slow. "Promises," he echoed. "They're what people use until they stop working." With that, Mika pulled something from her pocket, a small, single-edged blade, and before anyone could blink, she swung it at the chain that held a light fixture above them. The metal screamed and the bulb shattered, plunging the room into frantic, clanging darkness, lit only by the street lamps bleeding through slats. The sound exploded. People moved like startled birds. Tom's instincts took over. Reach, shield, move. He grabbed Rachel and shoved her toward a side exit. Daniel caught Lily's small hand and pulled her close. In the chaos, Mika lunged at Mark. He shoved her back with the strength of a man who had practiced repelling people who came too close. She fell against a stack of crates, and in the scuffle something thumped, hard, and then a sound that made Tom's ribs press tight. Mika did not rise. "No," Rachel screamed, the sound tearing out of her like a thing that could not be put back. Tom dropped and crawled, hands finding Mika's face in the low light. Her breath came thin. Blood darkened her shirt. Mark's men had taken a shot, quick, calculated. Peter's face appeared in the dark like a pale moon, unblinking. Time shrank to the tightness of a fist. Daniel hurled himself at a man reaching for a gun. Tom fought to pull Mika toward the exit. She looked at Rachel with eyes that were fierce and enormous with apology. "I am sorry," Mika whispered, and the words were small dying things. "I didn't want this." Mark holstered a gun with ease and walked toward Rachel, like a man who had come to collect a bill. "You played," he said, and the ledger's promise was now a prize he had earned through patience and pressure. Tom saw the look on Lily's face, the confusion, the loss of the small map she had been living with. It ripped something out of him. He stood, raw anger and grief braided tight, and made one real, terrible decision. He stepped in front of Rachel and Lily and met Mark's eyes. "We will not let you take her," he said, though his hands shook. The world had narrowed to this, a ledger, a wounded friend, a child caught in a net of adult sins. Mark laughed, low and bewildered, because the ledger proved nothing now but the cost. "You think you can stop me?" he asked. "You think pain will change what's true?" Outside, sirens wailed, distant and small at first, then swelling like a tide. Somewhere a phone rang. Choices were no longer private. In the dark, under the rain-washed lamps, truth and betrayal and sacrifice lay tangled on the floorboards. The room had become a crucible. Whatever came next would either burn them clean or bury them in ash. The sirens were close now, a rising wail that made the boards under their feet hum. For a breath, the warehouse felt suspended between two worlds, the one of quiet plans and the one of loud consequence. Mark's face, lit by a leaking strip of moon through a broken pane, looked like a man who had just learned a cost he had not counted. He held himself as if he had been taught long ago how to look untroubled while the ground moved. Tom pushed Rachel and Lily with a single hard movement toward a scrap of door that led outside. Rain met them like a hand. Daniel dragged one of Mark's men after him. The scuffle was raw and close. In the dark, Peter moved fast, trying to slip between crates and vanish. A flashlight cut the space, and a new voice, sharp, official, called out commands. Men in dark coats came pouring into the warehouse like the tide, urgent and precise. Mika lay near a stack of splintered wood. Tom had pushed her out of the worst of the fall, and she had bled warm and silent. She had one small, stubborn life left, and she used it not to plead, but to pass a small object into Rachel's hand. The USB wrapped in oilcloth that once had looked like a different kind of treasure. Her fingers were cool and trembling. "Listen," Mika said, voice small as a match flame. "I was scared. They took Anna. They made me do things. But I had a plan." Her breath rattled. "I made copies. I sent them to people who would not buy them. A reporter, a lawyer, an aunt who keeps files." She coughed. Her eyes were bright as if she had seen far ahead and found a sliver of light. "Promise me, protect her." Rachel could not say anything. The air had slammed into her like cold water. She held the USB as if it might dissolve. She wanted to howl at Mika for the pain she had caused, and at the same time the pain in Mika's face swallowed her anger. Why did you do that?" Rachel managed to breathe. Mika smiled like an ember. "Sometimes you have to act like you are with them to get close enough to break the line." She looked at Tom, and her face went soft with a fragile gratitude. "You came. That helped. Tell them. Tell Lily. Don't live always on the run." Outside, a heavy hand clapped down on Mark's shoulder. He did not resist much. He had the tired calm of a man who had been losing faith for a long time. Peter was led away by two officers whose faces did not show triumph. Susan stood against a crate and put her face in her hands. The look on her face was torn between relief and regret. In the jumble of voices, a radio crackled a name. Mark's organization was being dismantled by evidence already streaming into lawmen's hands. Mika's copies had hit inboxes the moment she had triggered the fixture and the broadcasting script she had set in motion. The ledger, the receipts, the names, proof had become a map that the law could follow. Tom pressed his palms to his face and felt the warmth of rain on skin. He had wanted redemption for old failures, but not like this. He had not wanted anyone to die. Now Mika breathed less and less, each shallow rise of her chest a small measure of time slipping away. A uniformed woman came close, kneeling. She had kind, sharp eyes. She took a breath and looked at Rachel. "You're safe now," she said. The words were both permission and a thin promise. Rachel wanted to believe them the way a child believes a closed door will keep monsters out. She wanted to believe safety was a place you could step into and stay. The reporters arrived hungry. The legal men practiced and were cool. The ledger's contents spilled into the world with a soft violence. Emails, receipts, names tied to bank accounts. They could not erase the past, but they could force a reckoning. Mark's reach, long and leathery, began to fray under public light. Men hired to watch became men who would be paid to speak. Susan's confession tied small, necessary threads together. Her voice, when she gave it, was rough but honest. She had been afraid. She had been a part of the wrong side. She had given the only truth she could. That night in the hospital ward, Mika's hand grew cold in Tom's. He tried to hold on to the warmth that had been there, the stubborn life that had kept a terrible plan alive long enough. She squeezed his hand once and then closed her eyes. When she left them, an old ache moved into Tom like a tide. He had wanted to stop being the man who looked away. He had not expected to pay this price. Rachel sat with Lily in a small, bright room while the law took statements and the reporters chased facts. Lily had a blanket over her knees and a cup of tea that went untouched. She kept touching the red scrap under her ear as if checking it was still there. Rachel watched the child's small fingers and thought about the way a single act, an act made to protect, could draw in so many other hands. She thought of the ledger wrapped in oilcloth that had almost cost them everything, and of the photo that had started this long, trembling chain. She pressed her face to Lily's hair and let the cedar of it fill her nose. Simple and true. When the house lights dimmed so the child could sleep, Rachel found a quiet corner and let the story line up in her mouth like a bitter pill. Theft had saved them. Theft had endangered them. Micah's sacrifice had helped make right what Rachel had only tried to make right. The law, which felt like a new and strange salvation, would sort the rest. But Rachel knew the ledger's public truth would not stitch closed every wound. Some people who had been small and hungry would still go hungry. Some men whose names were on no paper would keep their power in other ways. Justice was not tidy. It was a slow thing, often with sharp edges. Tom came and sat beside her. He smelled of rain and smoke and the grease of his life. "We did what we could," he said, the words flat and honest. He did not offer the kind of absolution that erases guilt. He offered a witness. Rachel looked at him. "Was it right?" she asked. The question had a white, clean edge that cut through the fog. She thought of the nights spent hiding, the lies told to protect a child, the small theft that had put a target on their backs. She thought of Micah's last breath and the way her hand had felt as she gave the USB. She thought of Lily's small, steady tune. Tom's voice carried the roughness of someone who had learned to measure words. "Sometimes the law is too slow for the people who are being hurt now," he said. "We moved because we had to. That doesn't mean there won't be consequences. It means we'll carry them." Rachel folded the USB into the pocket closest to her heart as if it were a small seed. She knew the world now had more witnesses, reporters, lawyers, names in official files. She also knew that safety would not be a promise made overnight. The ledger's release would cause ruin, but it might also free people. That thought steadied her. In the weeks that followed, Mark was taken to a court whose doors felt too small for the weight he had carried. Peter turned witness. Susan testified and wept. There were hearings and slow, legal days that smelled of paper and polished floors. Some men were arrested. Others slipped into corners. The ledger's truth cracked a few doors open. The city adjusted like a body that had been slapped awake. Rachel did not sleep well for many nights. She taught Lily to make new games about light in gardens and how to count stars. She taught her, too, the small truth that sometimes grown people make ugly choices to protect those they love. When Lily asked if they had done wrong, Rachel would take her small hand and say, "We try to keep you safe." It was both an answer and a promise to teach harder, to be better. Tom stayed for a long while. He fixed a broken step on Rachel's small rented house and mended a chair that had been a gift. He did not ask for praise. He wanted something steadier than the road, a chance to be the kind of man who stayed when needed. The law had not offered him redemption neatly. He found it slowly, in small things done without show. He learned to sit in the kitchen and listen when Rachel spoke and to laugh, awkward and honest, at Lily's crooked jokes. Rachel walked sometimes to the diner where Susan had worked. She left a small folded note, "Thank you, and I'm sorry," on the counter. Susan came out one afternoon with a cup of coffee and sat with Rachel. They did not exchange everything. Some things belonged to the dark. But two women who had made terrible choices in the same night could at least keep a small table between them and sit. Months later, Rachel stood in a park where the grass had gone green again after the first hard storm. Lily chased pigeons and then came back to wrap her arms around Rachel's legs. Rachel thought of Micah and the way a person could be both sinner and savior in the same heartbeat. She thought of Mark behind glass, of the ledger's long ripple through lives, of the small, stubborn bravery that made strangers come when a child asked without speaking. She understood in a new, painful way that right and wrong were not always simple maps. Sometimes they were roads you had to walk without a compass, and only the small tug of love to guide you. She kissed Lily's hair and let the sun press a warm, honest weight on her shoulders. It would not erase the nights. It would not answer every question. But it was enough for now, a place to stand and teach a child how to keep her hand steady and her heart open, knowing both the cost and the courage of the choice that saved them. I hope you enjoyed that story. Please share it with your friends and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. In the meantime, I have handpicked 2 stories for you that I think you will enjoy. Have a great day.